shout it too. All right, so these three topics that we have, problem statements, purpose statements, and your research questions, they all relate. And they kind of go in this flow. So your problem statement leads to your purpose statement. And from your purpose statement, you'll be able to develop research questions. And so while these are three separate sections of your dissertation chapter 1 that you're going to run, they all relate. And the better you're able to have a really good mesh between these three areas, the stronger your study is going to be. The easier it's going to be for your readers to follow through with what you're doing and why you're doing it. So look at these three parts. All right, so first I'll start with a cartoon for you. So this is kind of one of our age-old philosophical questions. If a tree falls in the woods and no one's there to see it, does it make any noise? Okay. So same thing applies to dissertations and research we do. If nobody's reading it and nobody's interested in it, and it's not addressing any pertinent need in our field, does anyone know what you did? And so part of what you need to do is situate your research so you're identifying a problem. So when we talk about problems, we're talking about what are we missing? What's the gap in the literature? If you're not writing about a gap, why would people come read your study? If it's just a replication of something we've gone over and we have reams and reams and reams of data about, there's no need to do it. So we like to always look at research as being this kind of hourglass function. And so really what it is, it's two pyramids. So we're going to have an inverted pyramid. Your study is going to fall down here at the bottom. And then we would have another pyramid at the bottom. That's your chapters 4 and 5 that you write. The precursor, though, your chapter 1 material, is this inverted pyramid, starting broad and working down. And so we can divide that into 4 sections. We can talk about the hook, the anchor, general, and the specific. But I like to use the analogy of late night infomercials. Right? Everybody's seen them? They all follow the same basic script. All right, so how do these infomercials start? Now you've seen them. Sure, you probably bought something else for them.
There's always something to grab your attention.
Right. So they always show like some everyday task that is a struggle. And they make it out to be the most momentous struggle in your life. I can't cut this penny in half. I can't slice a tomato without pushing it. All these things, right? So they hook you in. They try to sell you on the importance of this issue. Then they make it relatable to you. You didn't have to do that. You could spend more time with your kids. You could write a best-selling novel. You could do all this great charity work, all the things you could do. They anchor it in your interest. Now you start making it relatable to your life. Then they grab your attention. They start talking generally. It can be used for this, 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 and this, right? Multi-use. Then they start getting into the specific, how it relates to you. The same philosophy applies when you're designing research studies. You want to hook your audience in. Why is this important? So I assume you guys are writing in with C&I that's going to have an educational component. So why is it important? Is it important to teachers? Is it important to parents? Is it important to educational policy? What's kind of the hook? How are you getting it? Then you want to anchor your readers. What is their interest? So who is your audience that you're writing to? As you envision this study, who's going to be picking up this dissertation? The teachers themselves, administrators, policymakers, educators who are teaching the next generation of teachers. Start getting their attention. I think this is a great place to put a lot of stats and figures and things like that. It really kind of crystallizes the problem for individuals. And then get into the specific. Specific is now where you're going to be narrowing it down to this is your population to do. So maybe you're working with middle schools. Maybe you're working with schools in South Texas. Maybe you're working with charter schools, whatever. Finally narrowing it down. And then we end up with a gap. So the gap is where your study comes into play. This is the missing piece. This is where we got to this point. Now we need to fill that in. So at the end of the infomercial, the gap is when they tell you, all right, now here's the number you can call. They give you the information that's that missing piece. So that's what you're really trying to do with your research. You're really trying to sell people on why this is relevant, why it's relevant to them, how it's grounded in this general body of literature we have, and how it's specific to the population that you identify. So we start with problem statements. Problem statements are just that. They're statements. They're brief. So I see students write problem pages and problem mini dissertations themselves. If you're going more than 2 or 3 paragraphs at most, you've written too much. Most studies you can do this in a paragraph. Everything that you've written up to that point should be, you're following this funnel, honing people in. It shouldn't be, a dissertation should not be a page turner. People should kind of follow your thought and see where you're going. So when we talk about problem statements, we're talking about clear and concise descriptions of the issues that need to be addressed. And then as the researcher, you're the one who's selling that need, why this needs to occur. Problem statements are very important in your writing because they ground and center what you're doing. It's that problem statement that serves as the home base as you're doing. So as you start getting into writing your dissertation, you'll find that it can become a very unwieldy. You get in the literature, you see one thing, sends you down a rabbit hole, but you start reading about this topic, and you're like, oh, I want to add this variable. Or, ooh, maybe I want to look at doing this and that. That's a common experience. A lot of people. Your problem statement is going to be that home base. Nope, I need to focus on this piece of the pie. You've probably heard the expression people use that a good dissertation is a done dissertation. So identify what your piece of the pie is going to be that you're going to contribute and stick with that. Not only does it help you, it helps your readers. It focuses for them what the central idea that your study is about. I should be able to go to your problem statement section, look and say, okay, as a educated person in this field, yes, this is something that we need. So your problem statement is not a list of topics that you're going to be addressing, questions that you're going to be answering, or a brief description of the methodology analyses that you're going to do. All of that comes later. Your problem statement really just focuses on this is the gap in the literature. This is where we're missing information. And if we can make headway in this area, it'll open up in our field. So as you're writing this problem statement, this mental checklist that you should have is you want to cover these 3 areas. So what is the problem? And when you're talking about what the problem is, who is the problem for? So again, is this something for teachers, administrators, parents, policymakers? successful school initiatives. Who's the problem for? Where do we see this problem? Is it specific to school levels, types of schools, areas of the country? Or is it truly a global problem? And then what needs to be done? Do we need new instructional methods? We need new resources, we need new staffing, we need new training models. So give some insight into what would help this problem no longer be a problem. Okay, so a simple little checklist. Make sure that you have these things in your problem statement. So then you want to make sure that your problem statements pass the rock test. So as you're looking at your idea, is it researchable? Is there something you can do about this? The rest of your study, you have to outline a plan of how you can collect data, analyze that data, and report on it. So you want to make sure your problem is something that you can do those things for. There's research that emanates from it. Is it original? Research should add what we already have. So think of it as we're building a brick wall of knowledge. We're always trying to add new bricks. They could be small bricks, they could be large bricks. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to create a new wheel. Sometimes research can be very valuable in a small adjustment. So maybe a study's only been done with a certain demographic population. So now you're using a different population. Or it was done with one age group, but now you're doing a different age group, or in one country, now another. But there needs to be some element of originality to it, something that you're doing that's unique that others aren't. And then finally, it should contribute to your, it should provide something that readers can take away from it and do something, whether it's, I now have a new way to practice, a new way of conceptualizing an issue. I have data that I can now use to go advocate for my position with my students. Something that's going to be, so that's what you write about in chapter 5. Talk about implications. So if you do these things from the beginning, you hopefully will not find yourself running into a brick wall. When you get to the last chapter, you're like, oh, I don't have anything that I already contributed, or there's nothing new. What did I do for my studies? So I would venture to say your committee, your chair, are going to help you along the way to make sure that you have this. These are the criteria we look at the university level, that a dissertation should be rigorous enough for a doctoral level work, and it should contribute to the original studies. Questions about problem statements?
No, I'm just trying to wrap my head around all of it.
Okay. We good online?
Good, John.
And both John and I are in higher ed. He
Okay.
teaches at Del Mar and I teach here.
Okay.
I'll save it till the end. You might answer it in the middle.
He said he'll save it to the end because you might answer it in the middle.
Okay.
Okay.
Great.
John, though, if at any point in time and you want to type something in the chat, I can definitely let Dr. Watson know.
Okay, thank you.
I have a tendency of struggling with these hybrid ones. I forget the people online.
You're doing very good looking back and forth.
If you just pretend like I'm somebody in the audience, you'll make your way over here.
All right, so we have problem statements, but then purpose statements. Purpose, we go back to that inverted pyramid, we're at the gap now. So the purpose is, what is your study going to do? You've now outlined for me this great thing about where we are in the field, what we know in the literature, what's missing. Purpose statement now is what your study is going to do to fill that gap. So here's where you can talk about the objectives of your study. What you're going to cover. And then start getting into how you're going to do this. These purpose statements are going to vary based on the type of research that you do. So do you guys have in mind the type of methodology that you want to use?
Mine's going to be a qualitative or quantitative study. I work in the College of Nursing, and it's going to be more of a retrospective study, because I want to look at how COVID impacted our students and their exam scores. Because in the fifth semester, they have to take a comprehensive exit HESI and computer adaptive testing, and then they take boards. And I want to kind of see if having to go to online instruction for those face-to-face students had any impact on those scores. So I'll look at pre-COVID scores, comparable semesters, and then those students that were in COVID.
Okay.
And having to go from face-to-face to online. And was there an impact? I don't know. That's what I want to find out.
It's a $1 million question.
$1 million question. I mean, we know that there was an impact of some sort, but is it going to show in those scores?
And it'll be interesting, you know, we deal with this in our field as well. So we had a whole group of counselors come through that did all of their internship with telehealth models. So they never actually like sat in front of a live person. So it'll be interesting to see kind of long-term impacts. And if it's a negligible difference, does this now become a new way of training that's
And ours,
not just a blip, or it's here to stay?
and ours went from doing face-to-face clinicals in the hospital to simulated clinicals with simulations.
So, yeah.
So it's definitely going to be. Yeah, they do a survey also in that fifth semester. So I'm going to look at those surveys, and then those scores and what kind of pass rate did we have, and then compare them to previous. So it's going to be more of a retrospective study, but it's still, I mean, because we're not the only university or college that's dealing with, you know, the impact
Sure.
that we're, you know, nursing students that we're putting out. So I know that there's going to be research galore, but we'll see.
Contributes though.
Yes, it does.
And it's timely.
It does contribute. It is very timely, and it's going to be very interesting to see what kind of impact, if it did have any impact. I'm hoping that it doesn't, but I mean, I know that there was an impact, but is it going to show in numbers?
Sure. Okay. What's John working on? Quantitative, qualitative?
I'm in the mixed methods realm,
Okay, so do a little bit of both.
a little bit of both. I want the numbers, but I want it supported by, you know, the feelings and the thoughts and the, you know, the qualitative kind of stuff.
I kind of want to do the same thing, but I want to save that for after the fact.
Oh, there you
So
go.
I have more research.
Build that
Build on it.
agenda that you have. Yeah,
Because I thought about doing the mixed methods at first too, but
yeah, it makes sense. So the purpose statements you come up with are going to vary. Qualitative purpose statement looks different than a quantitative purpose statement, looks different than a single case design purpose statement, looks different than a mixed methods design. So it's not a one size fits all. You need to kind of tailor this towards the type of design you're doing. Much like the problem statement, these don't need to be lengthy. This could be a single statement, sentence, or it could be a paragraph. A good problem statement and purpose statement, I'm not getting much more than one page. Okay, I should be able to look at those and see, okay, this is succinctly what you're doing in your study. So all the things that we know about people's attention spans, very little. We see this in our modern technology and social media. It's a brief little video, short, boom, like it, continue. If not, they make a quick decision. Same thing with your study. Someone should be, who's looking at your study, potentially seeing if this is one they want to read or this is one they want to use and cite in their work. They should be able to look at these two sections rather quickly and say, yes, this relates to what I'm doing, or no, this is a different direction. So when you're talking about purpose statements, you want to have direction. Where are we going with your study? Again, are you advancing an existing line of research? Are you taking us in a new direction? Are you pulling the curtain back on things that we may or may not fully know? What's the scope of your work? All right, so you're talking about working with nursing students, but potentially the scope could be much larger. How has the shift to online learning affected students in general?
Because it even affects the College of Education because they couldn't do their student teaching. So
Yeah.
it doesn't, it crosses over.
Mhm.
Um,
And so you want to sell that in your purpose statement as well. While you're using this group, it's not limited to this group. It has greater application as well. And then you want to talk about the means. So how you're going to go about doing this. Collecting archival data, are you administering surveys, are you doing interviews, focus groups, however you're collecting information. That should kind of fit in your purpose statement too.
So like if I'm looking at that archival data, that's where this is where I'm gonna.
Mhm.
Okay.
So think of this as following from the problem statement. We don't know the effect of online instruction. Students, what do you call it? Is it a competency test they take?
Yeah, it's a comprehensive exam to cover everything they've learned in the program.
Okay, so we don't know the effect of online education and their performance on this. So the purpose of your study is to, blank, whatever you're going to do with that data. Are you going to compare students to people before online? So you talk about kind of how you're going to do it. I'm going to do comparisons of this time frame. Guess what were you talking about? A year and a half or so, whenever we started. I don't even know when we started COVID last March 20 or something.
March 20, because it was right in spring break.
Okay. Well,
We
yeah.
came back, we didn't come back,
Mhm.
and it was only gonna be a week, and then it turned into
The longest spring break ever.
a long day.
All right, so yeah, so in the past year and a half, compared it to another group, how are you going to do that? So you're going to look at scores, they have all that stuff that fits in there. So this then becomes the 30-second elevator speech of what your study does. So if you want to boil it all down, the problem statement is a brief description of what's lacking in our scientific community. And then your purpose statement is how you're going to come in and save the day, what your study is going to do to somehow fill that gap. Completely, partially, we don't
Maybe
know.
not.
Maybe, yeah, maybe not. Maybe you find things that don't fit in. But I like to think all research tells us something.
It does.
So even if you find non-significant results, just told us, okay, that's a door we don't need to keep going down.
Right.
So a checklist for you as you're developing purpose statements. Things that you could look for. These are all characteristics of good purpose statements. So as a reader, are you using words that would signal to me, this is your purpose statement? So, hey, you should probably have a header for this section, purpose of the study. But then use that, start your paragraph with that. The purpose of the study is. What's the phenomena that you're looking at? Right, the impact of online training, education. Student comprehension. You're doing quantitative studies, what are the variables that you're looking at? What's the intent of the study? Tapping in on those higher order skills. So again, the study is not to just give us information, so we just have it. How can we use that information? It should talk about the participants. So remember I talked about the scope and where it's at. So is this just localized? So you're going to be using students just from here, but you could also do a national sample, state sample. So let readers know what you're doing. The setting. Make sure in your writing, don't put a lot of these technical terms. Again, you're still at the point where you're selling to your reader why they should be reading this study. And you may have people outside your area. Other people may be interested in online education. It flows and it's consistent with your problem statement, so it should follow. The questions with those. All right, so that's your problem and purpose. Now we start getting into research questions. So you have no idea what you're looking. All right, so you see 3 images. Yep.
You have a question here from
Okay.
John. It said, should operationalism definitions go before the purpose? Or operational definitions go before the purpose?
Typically, we'll see them at the end of chapter 1. And that's where you'll start talking about, in this study, in this document, I'm using these terms this way. So we have 3 images on here. Take a couple seconds. Make sure you feel confident in your answers. Tell me what you see in the picture. I'll give you a hint. You don't have to read into it. It's not a psychological experiment.
Some of it is fearful.
Okay, so you think this is, what's over here?
We're really scared.
Scared, okay?
He said T-Rex taco scared little girl.
Okay. T-Rex, taco, scared little girl. What do you think? C2?
Yeah. But I'm trying to think, I'm trying to look at this and there's gotta be something else to it.
So how do you know that's a T-Rex?
From reading other books. There's a dinosaur,
Have you ever seen a T-Rex?
not in person.
John says popular media.
Okay, has anyone seen a T-Rex?
I have not
They've been extinct
for a lot of years.
millions and millions and millions and billions of years. But we know what that is. Okay. How do you know it's a taco?
So, I mean,
You're partaking in a taco?
I've partaken in a taco,
Okay.
you know, Taco Tuesday.
How do you know she's scared? You ask her?
No, just by the look in her eyes. And that she's like, "Ooh." That's the observation. Good person in me. As a nurse, you observe.
Have you ever been scared before?
Oh, yeah.
Have you ever done anything like that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Maybe not quite that whole thing, but
So 3 items here, you all identified what they are. You've never seen a dinosaur, interacted with a dinosaur. You don't know that girl. You haven't communicated with her. You don't know what's going on. And you know that's a taco. So we gain information in lots of different ways. How we gain information factors into how we develop research questions. And so when we talk about framing research questions, we're going to look at 2 terms, ontology and epistemology. And so it's the context in which we build studies. They relate to how we gather information. Okay. So we talked about, you said pop culture, so maybe you saw Jurassic Park. You said you saw it in a book, so maybe it's school learning. So you got that information from somewhere. Here, maybe you recognize that because you yourself have been scared before. You have children that have been scared and you've seen this look. And we've had tacos. See it, we know it. So how do we gather information? There's three main ways that we gather information. Get information. We start on the left. We get it from authorities. Early in life, your parents. It's remarkable. We've seen some studies, and anecdotally, you may recognize that how many people, political affiliation or religious preferences or any other beliefs you want to go through, initially mirror what your parents were, what you grew up with. That's what you saw, so that became, well, this must be what we do. Okay. Authorities change over time. Shift away, you start going to school. Teachers become the authority. Kids come home and say, hey, the teacher said this in class. You can say, no, it's not that way. And they say, no, it's the gospel. The teacher said it. So it's absolutely true. Then we get to middle age, teenagers. Your friends are your authority figures. Okay? So we constantly keep thinking authority. But that's one way that we acquire information and we know things. People told us. We respect that person for one reason or another. We assume that they are not trying to deceive or trick us. But they tell us 2 + 2 is 4. We go with that. I have an interesting student in one of my classes now who is just very inquisitive about where things come from. So when we're teaching these statistics classes, say, okay, this is the way this formula works, or this is what the bell curve looks like. Why? Well, I don't know. That's what we learned. That's the way it is. So we read about it in a book. We learned it. That's true. Second way we learn information is through our senses. We experience it. We touch it, taste it, hear it, smell it. We interact with it. Even at a very young age. How do babies interact with the world? Put everything in their mouth. So maybe that's how we get our information. If I can't see it, touch it, interact with it, it's not true for me. And the third way, our cultural beliefs. Our background and who we are and what contributes to that. Cultural beliefs, religious beliefs, spiritual ideas that we have. All of those things help us to understand what's true. And so we use all of these, but most of us have a preference or an inclination to lean or slant a little bit more towards one over the other. These are not ordinal, so one is not better than the other per se. But what way you go has a lot of bearing on the type of researcher you become. The types of designs that you seem to gravitate to is directly related to how you see the world, how you gather information. So if you're more of a black and white analytical person, the book told me 2 + 2 is 4. Maybe you lean more towards quantitative methods. I want something that's going to be clean, get your results. You're more culturally based, more of a qualitative person. You want to kind of know the story behind the story. Why is 2 + 2? Why does one group believe this and another group believes that? Where do those beliefs come from?
But we could be a mixture of all of them.
Yeah, we do all of them, but yeah, now you have a preference.
Right.
So you may do the shrimp, beef, and chicken taco, but you have a preference.
And Dr. Watson, I don't know if you're concerned with the time, but I'm not, but it's 6:10,
Okay,
just so you're aware.
what time do we go to?
6:30, but you take your time. I'm in no rush, so. Just wanted to let you know. I didn't know if you had class tonight.
No. Good. I don't know what slide we're on there.
13.
Okay, so we're about halfway done. Okay.
Good.
All right, so ontology is the study of focusing on identifying and understanding the things that exist in our world. So really it boils down to answering the question of what is reality and what is truth. What do we accept to be true? It's the starting point for all of our research. What we accept as truth, we then can build off of if we build studies. And so knowing your ontological persuasion helpful for you in designing research studies. And so we have this kind of continuum that we follow. So for the purpose of time, I'll just kind of focus on the extremes here. So you have a naive realism, then it goes, all the way to relativism. Naive realism, the belief that things have a purpose, they exist in a vacuum. They are that way, whether I'm measuring it here, there, on the moon, Mars, whatever it is. Static truth. As we start coming along, that gets a little shifted. So when you kind of get to structural realism, we understand, okay, what's on a college campus is different from what's on a high school campus. It's different in the middle. So you get to relativism. That's when you start realizing that context. Without context, in a vacuum, facts, observances, really meaningless. So if I tell you, you take a test and your score is 70, you have no idea what that means until I tell you the score is 2, or the class average is 50, or the highest score is 70, the lowest score is 70. The more information I give you, the more you understand about this instrument. So thinking about where you are in this continuum is going to lead into the types of research questions you ask. If you're more of a realist, you're going to ask questions that are going to get at getting that number or getting that specific fact. If you're more a relative person, you're going to approach your research realizing that there's no one truth. Truth is all subjective and contextualized. I'm going to identify something that's a piece of the puzzle. So whether you thought about it or not, how you view the world influences your view as a researcher. So what is truth? Right, the big question in the world today. It seems every issue in the world today. We have polar opposites. I say the ocean is blue, someone says no, it's purple. We don't agree. So truth is very objective. So I give you the parable of the blind man and the elephant. All right, so if you haven't heard it before, the story is you have these 6 men that are put in a room and they don't have the use of sight. And an elephant is let in the room and they're asked, what's in the room with you? And they all touch a different part of the elephant. And based on their tactile experience with the elephant and where they're touching, they all report something different. So this guy with the tusk says it's a spear. This guy says it's a hose, rope, wall, fan, it's a tree trunk. Who's telling the truth?
They all are.
Okay. From their own point of view, they're all telling the truth. So there's not one universal truth. So in our studies, our research questions, we're going to be getting at a answer, but in most cases not the definitive answer, maybe multiple answers. So playing off this idea of ontology, similar concept looking at epistemology. So epistemology, we're looking at now the origin and nature of our human understanding. It's the techniques that we use, the belief systems that we use to differentiate between what we consider to be adequate or true knowledge versus false or inadequate knowledge. The questions that people typically ask: what is knowledge? Where does it come from? And how do we know it's valid? And so there are different epistemological approaches. Three most common we have here. What are these guys? You agree they're fishermen? So that's an example of objectivism. We all kind of agree on it. Clothes, atmosphere, fish is sitting on a pile of fish. We all would kind of agree on that. People who work in the fishing industry. Right. It's objective. What's down here?
Money.
Currency.
Different denominations of money. Oh, or
What does money mean?
they used to buy stuff with.
Is it good or is it bad?
It's good. The more we have, the better we are.
Some people would argue it's like more money causes more
Oh,
problems.
that's true.
Some people say more money. Oh, look at all the things I can do. So money, this is an example of subjectivism. Money is very subjective. Okay. If you don't have it, you look at this picture, you go, oh, I'd love to have all that money. If you're a billionaire, you look at it and go, oh, that's what I had in my couch cushion. It's very subjective.
No way.
I'm with you.
Wait.
I cannot stand roller coasters at all.
That looks fun to me.
So this is
Maybe it's hard to
constructivism.
answer, but
All right, this one's constructivism. We construct our own reality. So we could look at it, and it's going to depend on what you bring to the situation. So you think it's fun?
Mhm.
I would be terrified. Same activity, but we see it in different ways. Right. So kind of the three main ways that we look at epistemology. Are you more of a objective person? See it when I see it. Subjective. There are many different viewpoints we can see a problem from, or constructive, where I'm going to take the context into play. I think I shared the example one of these times I was doing this, and so my research is in college student adjustment, and they make that process. And so we created an instrument, my team and I, and we had a question in there about financial insecurity of students and how that impacts their adjustment. So we had a question in there about, I get really nervous if my bank account dips below $50. And so then we were trying to do an international sample, so we collected data in Africa. And they reported back that $50 is a month's salary for someone. So they're like, that question is not really relatable to us. So, same prompt, different context. Right. Okay. So putting all that together allows us to frame research questions. knowing where you come from theoretically allows you to then develop research questions that answer the types of questions that you're interested in answering. Using the types of designs that speak to you. You're more of an objective person, you're going to want to do designs that are going to get a definitive answer. 2 + 2 is 4. Does that make sense? So our research questions then, in that context, what we're going to do. So research questions should define what you're going to conduct in your study and what you hope to learn. They're going to talk about what part of this problem, this gap that you identify, you're going to address. Then you may have multiple research questions. You could have a study with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different research questions. And regardless of the type of design you do, establishing research questions is important. You want to let your readers know what were you trying to do with the study. Okay, so those questions provide a roadmap of where you're going. Now, they're different than hypotheses. Hypotheses is where you start making educated guesses based on your review of the literature, your personal experiences, anecdotal evidence that you have. So all of that comes in as studies, literature experience. It builds into this information gap. And that's where your questions come into play. And you have different types of research questions that you can ask. You may have descriptive questions. All right, you want to know what exists. So part of your study may want to be like, what are the scores of students in the past, whatever time period you identify? And we're not necessarily at this point comparing them to anybody. We want to know what were the scores. Here's the average of our students. Here's the range. Here's the kind of variability we have in the group. You could have relational questions. Right? How do these compare to students pre-COVID? Higher, lower, about the same. Or you could have causal research questions. Starting to get into, well, what caused that difference? COVID itself? Was it people's inexperience with technology? And they spent more time worrying about doing the technology than actually acquiring the content in the course? Was it an access issue? Some people don't have computers at home.
We ran into students not having webcams. They had computers, but they didn't have webcams. That was a big issue that we had.
I think we made a lot of grounds, but something like this exposed a lot of weaknesses. So like in our program, we had a lot of students who use Chromebooks because, oh, you know, I can get online, I can do this. And then when it came time that you need to have webcams or to download software that we're using, can't handle any of those things.
I wish the Chromebooks would just disappear, but I understand why they're there because they're cheap.
Yeah.
But they aren't compatible with so much stuff.
Right. And I don't think we realized this before because there was always a backup. Well, I can go to campus and I can do this. So yeah, these different types of research questions. And sometimes you have a hierarchy. Your research questions and you have sub-questions. Right. So what are the competency scores for students during COVID? But maybe you have sub-scores. Is it different for men and women? Is it different for traditional and non-traditional students? You can break it down.
And see, and we do have an online program, but I don't want to look at those scores because those students chose to go online.
Sure.
I'm gonna look at the students that chose to go face-to-face and were forced to go online. So that's.
But you could, so you could keep breaking it down, and looking at those things. So when you think of research questions, maybe you have sub-questions as well that get into what you want to talk about. And so those were just kind of a couple I gave you at the beginning, but you can really have all these different types. So there are different types of descriptive questions, different type of relational questions, and different types of causal questions. So I would say, work with your chair, your committee, with what you want to do with your study and what might be appropriate for what you're working on. Okay, so as you're framing these research questions, things that you want to consider is key is what you can kind of prove with this. What are you hoping to do? The I is you want to have interest in it. Same thing with your whole dissertation. If you're not interested in doing this, do it. It's going to be a hard sale for you to do. So research questions should tap into that inquisitive side of you. What do you want to know? What are the different components that you're going to need for this? The objective measures you're going to need, and then kind of like a time frame or a timeline for doing this. So as you're writing your research questions, you should have these things. I want to look at students' competency scores as measured by, what is it, the HESI? Measured by the HESI, taken with students who were forced to go to remote learning at all this place. Let's see, people reference it all a different way and say Southwestern Regional Campus or Hispanic Serving Institution in South Texas, whatever you want to call it. So, but you kind of have that context involved. Qualitative studies, there's a couple different ways that you can go depending on the type of qualitative study you're doing. So whether you're doing kind of a phenomenological approach, a grounded theory approach, almost like a fill in the blank. If I could discover the meaning of one person's lived experience, I would ask, who is that person about? So there's things that you can kind of think about, types of questions that you can ask. You get that information. So just to give you kind of both sides of the coin, some quantitative and qualitative examples. So what makes for a good research question? A lot of different components to it. It needs to be feasible. A good question is really not a good question if you can't do that study. Is it interesting? Again, do you care about it? Are other people going to care about it? Is it novel? Is it contributing something new to our understanding about this topic? Is it ethical? So you're following IRB guidelines and things like that. Is it relevant? Okay. So your study is pretty relevant now when we're still in the midst of COVID, thinking about its impact. Is it manageable? And you don't want to be here 4 or 5, 6 years doing a dissertation. So is it something you can be done in a reasonable amount of time? Is it appropriate? Publish it. The end game, thinking about where am I going to go with this? Are there outlets that would take this type of research? And is it systematic? Is it step by step? Which it will be, because that's the way dissertations are set up. You go chapter by chapter, proposal, and then do your defense. So all of these things consider when you're developing research.
I like how it spells out binder maps.
Yeah.
Easy to remember.
Right. So problems that people typically know in research questions. So if you were to submit something for publication, you may have your committee, an editorial board will tell you, these kinds of problems. And then here's some possible solutions. If the question's too broad, maybe you need fewer variables. Maybe you're kind of throwing a little kitchen sink at it. I want to know how this, and this affect that. And that's everything. Narrow it down. If you don't have enough, maybe you need to look at expanding your group. Samples, more diverse groups. So things to think about if you're getting this feedback, ways that you can correct it. So as you're writing your research questions, again, just some tips, reference the population to who your results will be generalized. In your qualitative one, you may not necessarily have generalizability, but talk about who your audience is. Make the questions as specific as possible. It's hard to do. Maybe you need to break it up into multiple questions. Don't use words or terms that do not substantively add to what you're trying to say. So it's interesting when people get to the dissertation stage. I don't know if they think they have to also talk more scholarly than they had in the 3 years of the program previously. So you don't have to put all these big words. You don't need to pull out the thesaurus and get all these, what's the 5-letter word? Let me get the 15-letter word. It should be very succinct to the point. Focus on what you're going to study. Don't get into the implications yet. That's going to come later. Name the variables and constructs in the order they occur in your study, in your design. So consistency throughout. In your question, if you say I'm looking at variable A, B, and C, then when I get to your chapter 2, you discuss variable A first, then variable B, and variable C. When I get to chapter 3, and you show me the instruments, the way you're collecting that data, show me the instrument for A, B, and C. So keep it uniform. And try to avoid using words significant or prove. Again, we have this idea of contextual data. What's significant for you may not be significant for someone else. When we talk about statistical significance, it's really kind of an artifact of how many people you have, when you did the study, the time you did. It's very much could be different in a follow-up study. And here we really prove things. We may show some evidence that gives us a better understanding. That doesn't necessarily mean we prove. My disclaimer, check with your advisor and chair because they're the ones that are signing off on this stuff. So this is kind of my ideas. This is what I share with my students. I don't think it's unique and out of the ordinary, but work with your chair. That's what they're there for, to help you get through this process. So hopefully that helps you, with a little bit more information about kind of putting all these pieces together.
Because I think that sometimes in some of the classes we don't necessarily get this in depth. I mean, I know Dr. Valadez is kind of breaking it down for us a little bit more, but really, you know, just talking about these areas, this helps quite a bit.
Okay, great. Glad to hear.
Anybody online have any questions for Dr. Watson? Silence.
That's what he asked.
I think it might have
Good
been.
actual too. We have phrases, silence is golden, silence is deadly.
No. I'm a silence is deadly kind of person. Oh, John just said he logged off because his power keeps going out
Okay.
because of the storm. So, but he
Okay.
said thank you very much,
Sure,
Dr.
sure.
Watson.
Oh, there's a storm out there?
Maybe I don't know if he lives here in the city, but
He lives here in Corpus. So
well, then maybe we'll walk outside to
Yeah.
lunch. I don't know.
let's check the weather.
Jesse, did you have any questions online?
Or maybe it's coming.
I don't think so. Okay, well, if no one has any other questions, I'm going to end the WebEx and the recording will be up tomorrow morning. But thank you so much for joining us online. Have a good night.